Hello and welcome back to Model Railroading 101. I'm John. As usual, I'm in front of the camera, and this time I have another special guest behind the camera making everything look good.
Yeah, it's me, Steven Spielberg.
Right. Anyway, this time I'm going to talk to you about JMRI. As you know, I've been producing layout tours on this channel for the past several years, and I first heard about JMRI on one of those tours. It came up several times since then, almost always in the context of a model train club whose members are able to use their smartphones to control their trains on the layout. Seems pretty cool, doesn't it? Well, it turns out JMRI can do a whole lot more than just allow you to control trains on your layout with your phone. But what is it? JMRI stands for Java Model Railroad Interface. In the early 2000s, a small group of Silicon Valley techies wanted to figure out a way to get their computers to interface with DCC decoders so that programming the decoders would be easier. They got together and created a bundle of program modules based on Java, a programming language created by Sun Microsystems in the mid-90s. They chose Java because it is not dependent on any particular operating system. There's a whole lot more to this story, but let's just keep it simple since this is just an introduction. The first module completed was called JMRI Decoder Pro. It was completed and released in late 2002. The Pro in Decoder Pro stands for Programmer, Decoder Programmer. This program lets you interface with any NMRA standard compliant DCC decoder using a graphic user interface on your computer instead of having to deal with cumbersome traditional CV programming through a DCC throttle. Over the next several years, more modules were added to the JMRI bundle to allow users to control various functions on their model layouts via their computers. One quick note here, JMRI is an open source program, meaning it is free to use and people can modify it. This has some advantages, but with open sourcing, there are always disadvantages as well. Since this is only an introductory program, I'm not going to delve too deeply into specifics. Instead, I want to introduce you to JMRI by showing you how I use it to control trains with my smartphone, and then we'll talk to some fellow modelers who can show you some of the things that various modules of JMRI can do. One quick but very important thing to note. In order to use JMRI, you have to connect your computer to your track. This is done by using a special kind of interface that allows your computer to talk to your models and layout through a USB port. To control trains with your smartphone, the computer running JMRI also has to be connected to a Wi-Fi network. So let's head over to my workbench. Okay, so for the purpose of this demonstration, I have my MacBook Pro running JMRI connected to this circle of track through an interface called a SPROG2. So just like I mentioned a minute ago, the track is connected to the computer and the computer is connected to my Wi-Fi network. YThrottle is the iOS app that allows you to control a train with your iPhone if your layout has JMRI incorporated into it. There's also an Android throttle called Engine Driver. I have YThrottle because I have an iPhone. To use it, you just start the app. You connect it to the right network by pushing Settings here. And my network that I'm running right now is my JMRI Railroad, so that's correct. You go to this address button, and you can see that number 7883 is already selected on here. If this wasn't selected, you can just type it in like this, 7883. And that is in fact the locomotive that's sitting on the track here. You push set, and as soon as that top left rectangle shows green, that means your locomotive is acquired. So you can go push throttle here and it's ready for action. You can do everything with your phone now that you could do with a normal throttle. So let's turn on the light, see if the horn works. Sure does. We'll turn on the sound. Everything seems to be working. This slider will make the locomotive go. There are a lot of things you can do with Y-throttle, but this is only an introduction and we need to keep things basic in order to cover everything I want to share with you. One thing I want to mention though, about using your phone to control your trains, is that you don't have to spend money on a throttle if you do this. I often talk in the context of modeling on a budget, and this is one of those tips I've found to be very helpful, as throttles can be pretty pricey. So you can save a couple $100 just by using your smartphone. Now let's go visit my friend John Wiley. He wants to talk to you about Decoder Pro.
Hey everyone, it's Wiley here again, and welcome to my workbench. Today we're going to talk about JMRI and Decoder Pro. We'll go through some of the basic options of Decoder Pro and basic functionality. It'll do a whole lot for you, but we'll just cover the basics today. And so let's get started. Decoder Pro is one of many programs that comes as a part of JMRI. JMRI is the Java Model Railroad Interface. It's a now suite of programs that covers Decoder Pro, Panel Pro, and a large number of other programs. We're going to talk about Decoder Pro today, which is focused on programming DCC decoders for not only engines, but also accessory decoders for lighting, decoders that control switch machines, and decoders that will control a bunch of other items on your layout as well. So to launch Decoder Pro, when you install JMRI, by default it will put an icon on your desktop that says Decoder Pro. Double click it to launch it and it'll present you with the roster window, which when you first start Decoder Pro for the very first time will be empty, but if you open Decoder Pro on someone's computer like we have here, that already has some engines in it, you'll see the list of engines that have already been programmed with Decoder Pro. So, to get started, Decoder Pro is a pretty straightforward window. It has several columns. The first column is the ID you give to an engine, whatever you want to call it. Then has the DCC address, the decoder model, and a number of other fields which you can put information in or leave out depending on what works for you. An easy thing to get started with on Decoder Pro is to just add your first loco. So in the top corner there's a button that says New Loco. We'll go ahead and click the New Loco button, and it brings up a list of decoder manufacturers. If you know the type of decoder you're programming, let's say it's a Digitrax DZ126, you can go through the list of decoders and find that exact one, or at the bottom you can push a button that says Read Type from Decoder. When you push the Read Type from Decoder button, you often end up with several options for the decoder. This is because a manufacturer will use the same, let's call it, central processor on a number of different decoders. For example, Digitrax has one chip they use on board decoders for Kato engines, for Atlas engines, for Intermountain, and etc. Generally, you can use any of the options Decoder Pro says are a match, and you'll be okay. Or if you know the exact decoder you have, just pick that one. So in our case, on the screen here you can see there are a lot of options highlighted in blue. I happen to know that this engine has a Digitrax decoder for this Kato F3 engine, which is probably off screen and you can't see. So I'm going to go ahead and go through the list and pick that decoder. Okay, so here we are at the window of the list of decoders, and I have selected the decoder that I know is in this engine. It is a DN163K0B. So I will go ahead and click Open Comprehensive Programmer. It's a button at the bottom corner of the window there, and it pops up with the decoder entry for this engine. You're presented with options. You have ID. This is where you give your engine a name. I tend to use my initials. The DCC address, which is 6103 here, because that's the engine address. It's just the number I use. You can then enter road name, manufacturer, a bunch of other information. That's up to you if you want to enter it. Some people like to really detail their roster so they know what's what. Other people just do the bare minimum so they can get on to programming settings on the decoder. The first tab that the Decoder Pro sheet opens to is the roster entry tab. From there, we'll go to the next tab, which is the Basic tab. Has all the basic information of the decoder. I know, surprising. Here you can see there are a number of fields. One of the great things about Decoder Pro is, right here on the screen it just says short address or long address. You don't have to remember which CV corresponds to addresses up to a certain length, and which CV then corresponds to addresses over that length. what ones you can use, what ones you can't use, what else would you have to modify. It's just a couple of checkboxes, a couple of buttons, and you put in the number you want, and away you go. So under active address here, we need to select the long address button first. Any addresses over 120, the number 120, you need to use a long address versus a short address. So if I go 6103 in the active address box, that works. And then the rest of the information on the sheet you could leave alone or you could adjust. For example, I don't need to change the speed steps used on this decoder. I can leave that default. I don't need to change the address format on the decoder. I'll leave that default. There is an option here for analog conversion mode, on or off. That's asking you, do you want this decoder to run on DC or analog in addition to DCC or digital? I tend to turn this option off because I don't run DC anywhere at home or at my club, but some people have DC analog at home and some have DCC at the club. If you leave that option turned on, you can use the decoder in both situations. At the bottom of the sheet, you see a couple of buttons. One of them says Write Changes on Sheet. If you click this button, it will write the changes you've just made. For us, that's changing the address on the engine. You can click that. It'll write the changes to the decoder, and now your decoder has that address. One of the great things about Decoder Pro is it is a universal decoder programmer. It'll program almost any decoder that's out there on the market, whether it is a Digitrax board decoder, an ESU sound decoder, or a Zemo motor controller. It can do just about anything. It also lets you program all these decoders without having to know CV values, CV tables, extra bits within a CV. It presents programming in plain English with yes-no choices, with high, medium, low speed options. You can get very detailed or you can keep it very simple. It allows you to quickly and easily program decoders. It also lets you to find out information about a decoder if you don't know what it is. For example, if you buy a used engine that already has a decoder in it, you might not know what brand decoder is in it, you might not know what address it is. You can put the engine on your programming track, hit a button in Decoder Pro, and it will read the decoder to find all this out for you. Here we'll take a quick look at a number of the tabs that are in Decoder Pro. So the first one you start out with is the Roster Entry tab, and that's where you put in the basic information, the identification for the loco, if you want to put in the road name, the road number, the manufacturer. You can use JMRI somewhat as a database to track your trains, but since it's just engines, it's probably just going to be your engines and not all your other rolling stock. The next tab is the Function Labels tab. This tab is related to when you're using Y-throttle or other systems to talk to your decoder. It will determine what label shows up for what function. So light, bell, horn, things of that nature. We won't get deep into this today, but you can customize what you see on other screens when you're controlling your engine. From here, we have the Roster Media tab. This is used with Y-throttle or another web server type application you can use with JMRI, where it will actually hold a picture of your engine if you want to be able to display a picture of what you're running on a screen or a throttle. Now we get to the Basic tab, which is probably what a lot of people want to use Decoder Pro for more than anything else. Here you set the address of your decoder. You can also set whether or not the decoder will respond or work on a DC or analog layout, or if it only works on a DCC layout. After the Basic tab, you get to the Motor tab. On the Motor tab, the two fields most people will want to use are acceleration and deacceleration. This is how long your decoder will take to go from full stop to full speed. So a small value for acceleration rate means it goes from 0 to 100 miles an hour in 5 seconds, or 0 to 100 miles an hour in 30 seconds. Conversely, your deacceleration rate is the opposite, from 100 miles an hour to 0 in either 30 seconds or 5 seconds. Obviously that's a bit of an exaggeration, but you get the idea. After the Motor tab, you come to the Basic Speed Control tab. This uses the 3 CV values you hear people talk to, or you could almost consider it the basic speed table for controlling speed of an engine. It basically sets your low-end speed, your mid-range speed, and your high-end speed. One thing to note is not all decoders support the mid-range or mid-volts speed setting. Most modern decoders do, but I know there were some lens decoders that did not, and probably some other decoders that did not in the past. So you may or may not get a lot of value out of these fields. After your basic control tab, you get to the speed table tab. And this gives you the full 28 speed steps that you can customize the speed curve, or how your decoder will respond as you turn your throttle from 0 all the way to max. You can get very detailed with the speed table. You can make the decoder respond very slowly across a low range and then suddenly jump up, which might be a switcher that would run slowly most of the way through its power range, and then when you turn it all the way up, it would speed up. You could do the opposite, where something goes from 0 to almost max because it's a quickly accelerating engine. You can fine-tune what you want your decoder to do here. After the speed table, you have the function map. This allows you to change which outputs on the decoder respond to which function buttons. Normally, your F0 turns your light on and off. Well, if you want your F0 to turn your bell on and off, you could change that here. Different decoders have different options for reassigning functions, so you'll have to take it on a case-by-case basis what you can change. Now you have a tab called Lights. This tab sometimes changes depending on which decoder type you've told Decoder Pro you're using. Digitrax will show you one set of features, ESU will show you a different one, Soundtrax will show you yet a third. Finally, some of these last few tabs either have very little or no information. Here we are on the Analog Controls tab, which for Digitrax is just on or off. The settings on this tab are also reflected on that first basic tab, where if you turn analog conversion mode off or analog mode off, it'll be off on this tab as well. So some of the tabs in Decoder Pro duplicate functionality across the screens. Here we have a consist tab. This refers to advanced consisting. Advanced consisting is when you want to run multiple engines together or MU them together, but you want them all to respond to a single address. There are multiple forms of consisting or advanced consisting, and this is consisting that is programmed into the decoders and is not run by the command station. For further explanation, we'll see if we can get John to do another video in the future on this. Getting towards the end of the tabs for this decoder, we have one called Advanced, and the only option for this decoder is Digitrax Transponding on or off. Digitrax Transponding allows you to read the address from a decoder as it's going around the layout within a block. You need specialized equipment to do this. You also need some specialized block detection, I believe. So it's not a feature I'm very familiar with. Getting towards the end, we have the CVs tab in Decoder Pro. The CVs tab lists out all the individual CVs that apply to a decoder. So it can be 200 CVs, it can be 500 CVs plus, depending on some decoders. It's the whole list. This list of CVs is what Decoder Pro is doing for you. You don't have to know what CV7 or CV2 or CV19 do. You just have to know, yes, I want advanced consisting on or off, or I want the headlight to be F0 or to be F1. CVs are what actually control that behavior, but it's difficult to remember which CV does which, at least it has been for me, so I just use Decoder Pro and it figures it out for me. Finally, we have a tab labeled Digitrax, and this is for features specific to the Digitrax decoder. If we were doing a Soundtrax decoder, we would probably have a tab that said Soundtrax, and again, it would have specific features for Soundtrax. For example, they have a sound equalizer you can adjust in Decoder Pro. On this one, it has a number of things about changing the motor type, about speed steps, some other options. It's fairly advanced settings for most people, so you may not ever need to worry about it, but it is there if you wanted to log into it. One of the great things about Decoder Pro, and in addition to all the other things we've talked about, is there is a Tell Me Everything button at the bottom. When you open up Decoder Pro and you pick a decoder from the list, the very first tab, if you look at the bottom of the screen, there's a button that says Read All Sheets. You can hit this button and go get a snack. This button will go through every option on the decoder that Decoder Pro knows about and log the information for you. It'll look up the address, it'll look up the acceleration settings, it'll look up the speed table settings, it will look up the function map, it'll look up the lights, anything it can find out, it will look up. So it's great when you don't know what's in the box or what's inside your engine, but it can take a while. So use it with caution, but also know it's there. Another button or option to know about is when you're on a given tab in Decoder Pro, let's say it's the basic tab, there is a button down at the bottom that says read full sheet. This button will just read the information that pertains to that sheet. So when you're on the basic tab, it's just going to read your address, it's going to read your analog on-off, it's going to read if you're using 28, 128, or 14 speed steps, it's just going to look up that information. And that can be a quicker way to find out what's going on, and you can just change the one or two options you want versus doing the read all sheets. Additionally, when you've made a change on a sheet, so let's say on the basic tab we have just changed the address, you can hit the button that says write changes on sheet, and that will only change the one piece of information that you updated. This is really good when you're troubleshooting an issue on a decoder. You're not sure if you maybe made a program change or a setting change that has screwed something up. You can change one thing at a time, tell Decoder Pro to change just that setting, and see if it fixes your problem or if something else happens. Okay, well, thanks for hanging out on the workbench today. We've just scratched the surface of Decoder Pro. There's lots more to it, but we hope this can help get you started. I have found Decoder Pro to be super useful for just quickly programming engines and helping to speed match engines, helping to get things be almost the same when you're going between different engines and you want them all to run well together. It also just helps me keep track of what decoder I've put in what engine since I've tried almost all the brands out there. We hope you've enjoyed our little program here, and we'll come back to you in the future with another one on Decoder Pro and other fun train-related stuff.
As you can see, even just this one module makes JMRI worth having. It's also really great to be able to have all your decoder's variables on a screen like that. Not only does it make it easier to understand the changes you're making, but it also makes it a lot quicker and easier to program your decoder using plain English instead of having to sit there with a throttle entering cryptic information in a way that isn't intuitive at all. Did I mention there's more? Decoder Pro is really great on its own, but there's a module called Panel Pro, and it's also quite handy. Let's go talk to Rich Murphy and find out how he uses Panel Pro on his layout.
Hi, it's Murf. I'm back again, this time to talk about Panel Pro, part of the JMRI packages. I use Panel Pro to control turnouts and control routes on my layout. In the future, I plan to do block occupancy detection on it and also control signals. Getting to actually putting up panels requires doing some setup in JMRI to get things registered in order to be able to actually use them in the panels. You need to be able to specify, for instance, how clicking on a turnout, where that should go to, what address the turnout is, and that sort of stuff. Actually, this kind of comes down to my journey to using JMRI to actually control the layout in a way that allowed me to get out of a little bit of work. So let's go through that. Originally, when I started setting up my layout, I had a lot of construction to do, and I was putting in tortoises, switch machines, in order to control my turnouts. And in order to control those, I was using NCE switchets. These are accessory decoders that allow you to set an address and actually turn a turnout. And I found that to be fairly easy. It's part of my job as a software engineer. And for me, it's a lot easier to program a switch controller than it is to solder a wire. So I started putting in these switch machines with switchets, with accessory decoders, with addresses. And I would use my NCE throttle to activate the switch one way or the other. I was the only person operating in my layout at the time, and it was fairly simple. I started using JMRI, and JMRI has a thing called a turnout table. Well, I started to fill in the blanks on the turnout table, registering all the addresses for all the turnouts that I had. The thing that I found then is I activated Y throttle, and Y throttle was great for running my trains, but Y throttle also allows you to control DCC controlled turnouts in a separate panel. Now, Y throttle is actually fairly easy to get going. If you look at it and you go to the Tools menu on Panel Pro or Decoder Pro, select Panel Pro, go up to the Tools menu, it's going to drop down, and you'll notice on there there's a thing called throttles. If you look at the bottom of that panel that pops up, it says Start Y Throttle Server. Once you do that, it's up. As long as you got your Wi-Fi running on your computer at home, you're up and running. And you can look for, on either Y throttle on your iPhone or engine driver on your Android device, the server that's actually giving you a Y throttle type interface. So my path to using panels in Panel Pro started off with using Y throttle to control all of these turnouts that I'd put into the turnout table. You can roll over, and here we have actually labels for all the turnouts controlled on my layout. They're found in the turnout table, and Y throttle can actually show them to you. And you can click on one, and it'll actually control the turnout. So I could run along with my trains, running them through the layout, and actually turn turnouts on my phone. When I started using Panel Pro, I started off with just filling out the turnout table, and that allowed me to not have to have a whole bunch of panels wired up on my layout, and I could control things with my phone, as we saw a few minutes ago. Next thing I wanted was a graphic representation of precisely what I'm doing, so it'd be a little bit easier to visualize what was happening. I made 2 different panels while I did this, using the layout editor in Panel Pro. I have my upper level staging panel, and I have also a dispatcher panel that basically controls turnouts on the route. So with these panels, I can control things from my computer, which is fine, except that I like to follow my train around the room. And better to be able to do that, I can actually access it from my iPad. And you'll notice here I have a web browser running with my panel up on it, and I can actually control turnouts from a web browser. That means that I can actually control it from anywhere in the house. If I actually wanted to have a dispatcher in another room, it would all work. The cool thing is then, I can use Y throttle to control my engines. I can use my iPad to control the route. It's really handy that way. So another nice fallout of this is that if you're using Y throttle on an iPad, you actually can have multiple throttles up top, and also you can have the Panel Pro panel at the bottom, and you can flip between them. So I'd mentioned previously about entering turnouts into the turnout table. In order to get to the turnout table, you need to go to the Panel Pro Tools menu, go down to Tables, and select Turnouts. As you make these entries, you'll notice that the first thing is actually the system name. The system name consists of a prefix describing what the system is you're using. I'm using an NCE system, along with the address. So you'll notice I have NT1004 here. Next to that, you have a username. I need this kind of stuff because really, I don't remember which address is which when I'm running around the layout. So I actually label them based on where they're at. You'll notice that NT1004 is Mojave North 1. And so I label it that way. It's a little bit easier for me to understand that rather than the system name. You can also throw or close the turnouts on this table, which is a good way to test it. One of the other things I mentioned while working with my iPhone with the Y throttle app was the ability to manipulate routes. And here's where you actually set it up. It's just a little bit lower in the turnout table. You'll notice that there's a thing called routes. Select that. I have one here, Mojave North Yard 1. And we're going to take a look at what I have set in here. You'll notice that up here at the top, we have a whole list of turnouts. But you'll notice that I'm only including 3 of them in the setting for this particular route. Mojave North Yard 1 is set closed. Mojave North Yard 2 is set closed. And in this case, Mojave North Yard, which is the entranceway to it, is set to thrown. When I select that route and click on it, it will actually set those 3 turnouts the way that I have specified here. So those are just some of the features of Panel Pro that I've started to use. But that's only scratching the surface. There's a lot more to do with Panel Pro and a lot more you can do with controlling your layout. You'll notice as you look through the tables that there's ability to set up sensors to detect trains in a particular block. You can set signals. You can set up light effects that actually happen as your trains traverse the layout. There's a whole lot you can do. I've found this to be really useful, and it's made my life in Model Railroad a lot more enjoyable and fun. I've been able to use it with my iPad and my phone and Y throttle and all that kind of stuff. I've had a lot of success with it, and I suspect that you guys will probably find a whole lot of better ways to even use it, and hopefully you'll be making your own videos and making me a believer in this stuff and showing me great new ways to use this software. I really enjoy using Panel Pro, and it's really made my model railroading a bit better.
Using Panel Pro to create routes seems like a pretty cool idea. Being able to throw several switches all at once is a great way to make things more efficient. I also like how you can use Y-throttle or engine driver on your phone or tablet to make it all happen. I've been using Y-throttle to control my trains, and this past weekend I used it to throw a turnout for the first time, thanks to Murf's explanation of how to do it. Thanks, Murf, I appreciate that. It opened up a whole new world for me in a sense. To complete this introduction to JMRI, let's visit Ray Turner and his Mystic Mountain garden layout to learn how he uses JMRI to organize his ops sessions. Be sure to stick with him through to the end though, because while the setup process seems a little tedious, the payoff is being able to create an entire ops session with the stroke of a key on your computer.
So hi, I'm Ray Turner. My railroad is the Mystic Mountain Railroad. It's a garden railroad. We run operations on it, and we use JMRI operations module to do it. And we're going to talk about steps it takes to use the JMRI operations for any railroad. But I'll tell you first that for a garden railroad, one of the things that's different is that it's outdoors, and the trains, the tracks stay out, of course, but the trains come in all the time. And so there's quite a setup operation to get ready to run operations. But let's look at what you have to do first. You have to enter information about all your cars, and you can also enter information about your locomotives if you wish. You have to enter information about the locations on your railroad, the spurs, the industries. And you have to enter information about the routes that trains are going to take. Those are the three major things you have to enter to create the database. And once you've done that, then it's a simple matter of choosing which trains you want to run today and telling JMRI to generate what they call manifests for each train that tell the engineer and the conductor what work they're going to do at each industry they go through. From the Decoder Pro menu, we click on Operations, and first we'll go look at the cars. Here's a list of the cars on my railroad. You can sort the list by clicking at the top of a column and generate a list sorted in any number of ways that you might need to look at them. You can edit a particular car, and you'll see the car has a road number and a road name. It's a type of car, that's going to be important. It has a length, that's also going to be important. And then a location, where is this car? So this car has to be somewhere on your railroad unless it's out of service. So you have a location and a particular industry within that location. There may be multiple spurs at a location, and so they'll have different information there, different industry. Okay, so that's how you enter the information about a car this way, or you edit it. Once you've created your list of cars, and I have probably 75 or so here in the railroad, then you want to look at locations. For locations, we have the names of, let's call them towns or areas or industrial regions. And within each one, let's look at this one here, there'll be spurs, several spurs usually, sometimes only one. Each spur will have a length. That's important because it knows then how many cars it can fit on that spur and how many is too many. You talk about whether that spur is serviced by trains moving north or south or either. And you talk about what kind of cars make sense at that particular spur. So you define the kinds of cars that JMRI will create for that location on the switching lists. Let's take a look at a yard. Here's the North End yard. Notice that it's classified as a yard, and it has basically storage tracks in it. Now in this case there are several tracks, but I have no reason to separate them. I don't care which storage track JMRI schedules for trains to drop off cars on. I just want them somewhere in the yard. So I have a total length of 512 feet. of which currently 442 is used with 13 cars. And there's no scheduled pickups or setouts at this point because we haven't created any trains. But also notice that in a yard, almost all types of cars are legitimate to be in a yard. And finally, the third type of track is an interchange track. So here's the Santa Fe interchange. That would be an interchange with other railroads, in this case the Santa Fe Railroad. So the rule for interchanges is that cars can be dropped off and picked up there, but not by the same train. So a different train would be picking up the cars. In this case, there's one track on this interchange. It has a length of 115 feet. 34 are currently occupied by one car. And it lists the kind of cars that would make sense to have on the interchange, which is most of them. So you've seen that the different types of locations have different kinds of tracks potentially. You list all the spurs that are at a particular location. And now JMRI knows what kinds of tracks and industries are on your railroad. And the third bit of information that you need to enter into JMRI under operations is the type of routes that there are. Now you can also enter all your locomotives, in which case JMRI will schedule locomotives to run your trains. But in my particular case, I choose to have the operators and myself schedule which locomotive is going to run which train. So I don't tell JMRI what my locomotives are, and I schedule that myself. So routes is what's left. You have to define routes where your train is going to run from a certain yard or a certain staging area. It's going to run through certain towns in some order to do work, and then it's going to return perhaps to the yard it came from, or it's going to run all the way through to another yard. Whatever it might be, you're going to define all the routes that you think a train might want to take. Here's one for the Costa Local. It says that it runs north end, which is a yard, to Costa, which is an industrial area, and it returns. So if we look at that particular route, we see that it starts at North End Yard, as I said. It runs to Costa to do work. It comes back to North End Yard. Then there are some spurs at North End that it switches and returns finally back to North End Yard and completes. For each one of those locations, we tell which direction is the train running in when it leaves there, and we tell it how many moves is it allowed to make at that location. A move is defined as a one-car drop-off or one-car pickup. If it drops off and picks up one car, that's 2 moves. So then we can talk about a few other things, whether it's doing pickups at that location or setouts at location, usually both, but not in the yards, of course. At the end of the run, it's just doing setouts. So by setting up a lot of routes, which may seem a bit redundant, I can change the complexity level of the operation to match the skill level of the operators and to challenge them along the way. So now it's time to run some trains. Now, because it's a garden railroad and the cars have to be moved and set out every time we're going to have an operating session, something that I do is to check the car list to see what locations have cars at them, and I balance it. I move cars around at the locations to make sure there's the right number of cars. So a spur that's only supposed to have 1 or 2 cars on it only has 1 or 2 cars, but it doesn't have 0 because otherwise there'd be no work to do. It makes it more interesting that way by balancing the load that's going out onto the railroad at the start of the operating session. So once I've done that, then I know how to go and physically move the cars to where they're supposed to be. But now I want to do the paperwork that I'm going to give to the engineer or conductor to run trains. So I want to decide which trains I'm going to run in this session. So I might want to run the Costa Local, let's say, and I want to run a North End to Outlook Local, and I want to run a southbound Outlook to Local. Let's say I want to run 3, have 3 crews running. Now I can do what's called a build. A build will build the list of work for each one of those trains. So if I do that, it now, in just that second or so, it's gone through and it's created those 3 trains. Now we probably like to look at them and inspect the workload that it's given engineers to see that it's kind of sensible and not too easy. So we can preview what's called the manifest. This is a manifest for the train Costa Local. So it's going to pick up 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 cars in the yard, and it's going to go to Costa, and it's going to pick up and drop off do all this work at Costa. Then it's going to go to North End Yard, and it's going to pick up another car, set out a couple cars, and go to North End Spurs and do some more pickups and set outs, and finally return to the yard and set out a car. So I look at this and I say, that's a nice amount of work. That probably will take someone an hour and a half to do. So that's a good job. Look at the other ones. I take a look and say, well, so we're going to pick up 3 cars in the South Providence yard. We're going to go to Out of Luck and do some work. We're going to go to the Sawdust Mill area and do some work. We're going to go to the Oil Spur and work Red River. Then we're finally going to return to the yard and set out all these cars that we've picked up. So that's a good amount of work. That'll probably take someone an hour and a half to do. That's a good job. And so forth. I look at the North End to Out of Luck local and see the same thing. It looks like a reasonable amount of work. Occasionally you may find that the program's gotten lazy and isn't moving enough cars, and then all you have to do is reset that train and try building a different train. Okay, so now I've got 3 trains built. I got those 3 manifests. I can print those out and hand those papers. They'll look something like this. I can print those out and hand those to the engineers and conductors that are going to run those trains. When they come back and finish the job, I'm going to terminate those trains so that the program now knows that the cars that it created, the movement it created for cars, the cars actually have moved. So if I click terminate, then I can, if all 3 have happened, I can just terminate from here. If all 3 haven't run yet, I just want to do 1, I can terminate those from over here. So that's a particular operating session that takes maybe an hour and a half, as I said. And then we want to run more trains, so we'll select different trains to run and build those and run them and terminate. And so the program is keeping track of where all the cars are so that it can build the correct manifests. So that's a brief introduction to the operations module for JMRI. There is a lot more complexity buried under the covers if you choose to use it, which I have not yet. But you can specify when cars are loaded and empty, and the program will automatically switch from load to empty at certain places. You can specify that certain cars on certain trains can only go to certain places. There's a lot of power under the hood if you really want to get into it. But fortunately, you don't need to. It's pretty simple to set it up and just get running this way. The main work is to get your car list in. Which, of course, is a good thing to have because for insurance purposes it's nice to have a complete list of all your cars. So that's just an introduction to JMRI. If you're interested in more information, there's the full online documentation set, and there's a user forum. People are very cooperative on the forum about answering questions for people getting started. So give it a try.
So there you have it, and we've only scratched the surface of what JMRI can do. Keep in mind that in order to use JMRI, you need to have an interface that connects your computer to your track, and in order to use a Wi-Fi throttle, you need to have a Wi-Fi network up and running that your computer is connected to. I hope you've gained some knowledge and have been inspired to find out more about JMRI. You can download it at jmri.org, and while you're there, consider making a donation so it can continue to be free. What do you think? Do you use JMRI? What's your favorite application? Maybe you've found a way to use it that's even better. Do you think we should delve a little deeper into these modules that you've been introduced to here today? Please let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and make it a great day.